So
Mm,
tell us a little bit about how you grew up, and so yeah, what
yeah,
made you who you are today? Yeah.
right. I think I have the example of the person that I think the Tech for Good label really works on how I grew up, because I didn't grow away from tech. And for a climate activist, I didn't grow with my hands in the dirt half the time. Like, this was not who I was. I wasn't doing camping all the time. The first picture of me with a computer, I probably am 2 or 3 years old, right? But the computer, what I'm doing with it is I'm not online. I don't even know how that would have worked at the time, but I'm typing words or using paint. And that's kind of been a trend after it. I had a computer that I was allowed to have in my room early on, but I didn't have Wi-Fi in my room. And I had computer games, but they were computer games that my parents approved of. So, some of them were like building cities, some of them were scientific. We have in France something called C'est pas sorcier, and it's kind of it's like the David Suzuki of France kind of thing, and we had a game for that. So it was a very conscious use, which made me tech savvy. Like, now I have no issue getting on a computer and finding my way around it. But it didn't make me exposed to the internet.
Mm.
Um, and then, I also remember we only had internet in the living room. And so even when I got a little older in my teenage years and I wanted to watch shows or I wanted to, go online, in the end, my parents knew, and they didn't check my internet history like some of my friends' parents did, because they had internet in their room. We just always had that like conscious use. So, um, and then that's an also important thing. I was heavily discouraged, maybe I could even say told not to have social media, basically until I was 17 and moved to Canada. So no Facebook, no Instagram, no. I believe I had a sort of Twitter account, but that really wasn't active. The good thing is I still had, you know, text, which was what I used the most with my friends. And then eventually by the age of 50, which is pretty late, well, not late, I think it's the right age, but I mean, for this generation, it would be considered late. By the age of 15, I had Snapchat, because that's when Snapchat came out. And so these were the good tools to communicate. And I think these were good to have, being able to text my friends after school was a real addition. It was a fun thing. We shared like memes or things like that, but I didn't feel too isolated. First of all, because you see them at school all day. Also, because I kind of understood why I think I was told not to use them. I wasn't just told not to do it. There was
Yeah.
a conversation with it of
Yeah.
why. And in the end, I this might sound harsh, but you get over it. Also, as a child, like there's a lot of things that you're gonna think, oh, it's kind of unfair, but in the end, because I didn't have Facebook, I spent a lot of time on Pinterest. And Pinterest is, I would say, a very safe social media, although it could be addictive, I guess. But I was just looking at recipes of cupcakes. I recently went back to my Pinterest account, and it has pictures of nail polishes and cupcakes. And I think that's fine. It's okay. And so I
Right.
think there might be a tiny moment where I was frustrated. I mean, I'm sure there were, but as you can see, a few 10 years after, I don't remember a great degree of suffering. So I guess whatever it wasn't bad enough to traumatize me, is what I mean. um, I'm definitely worried, and I think I would honestly say it's a failure of our education system and our government to pretend like it's it's just a parent's thing to address. There's a reason why vaccination, or there's a reason why nutrition have guidelines by governments, because we said leaving it to parents is too high of a risk for an entire generation. And I think this is the same case, where this is a public safety issue. If we have young girls that are all going through the same body image issues exacerbated by social media, this becomes a generational issue. And so I genuinely think we're letting a whole generation down, on top of letting them down for climate, and on top of letting them down for COVID. And that's just a lot of letting down a whole generation.
To me, there's a bit of a parallel with the climate crisis as well, because my personal point of view is that there is a developing digital crisis that
Mm,
where a lot of responsible adults are not either aware of or willing to face up to. And it reminds me of the climate crisis, where a lot of people were writing books or putting out research and saying there's an issue with climate. This started what, in the 90s, 80s, 90s. There was this
Even before the
even
70s.
before, but I mean, there was this big
Yeah.
I forget, maybe this US senator who started
Yes.
really saying we have
Yes.
an issue. But the industry, the oil industry, especially in the US, big Standard Oil, I think,
Yeah.
lobbied and put out this articles and research that said, well, we're not sure what's causing global warming.
Mhm.
And this was so efficient that we all started doubting that there was really
Right.
a cause, a link between our activities and global warming. And to me, I'm seeing the same phenomenon
Yeah.
today with a lot of the big tech companies out of California,
Right.
the Facebooks, the Googles, the Instagrams, and the video game makers saying,
Mm.
putting out articles about how, of course, video games can be addictive, but they also have very positive aspects, which like hand-eye coordination, uh,
Right.
which is a big.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that we're sort of missing the big picture of how is this media shaping young people's outlook on
Yeah.
life and brains, because we know now that it's developing their brains in a different way. Just to in the name of self-expression, how it enables some people to surface and be stars, or in the case of video games, we do have extremely coordinated young men
Yeah. Yeah.
who
I
unfortunately.
think it's a good parallel. I think it's an excellent parallel because of what you were getting to, which is there are some benefits. That doesn't mean it's a net benefit, and that doesn't mean it's a benefit that we should just go unregulated. And that's the oil story.
Yeah,
Fossil fuels are the reason I have the standards of living I have today. There's no, the way we generate electricity, the fact that I'm able to travel back to my home country of France and to Canada, this is fossil fuel driven. But there's two things. Is first of all, at what cost? The cost of a climate crisis, the cost of lung cancers and air pollution, the cost of a lot of destruction. So first of all, now when we look at it back, we're like, at what cost?
yeah,
And the second thing is, what was the other option?
yeah,
Because we locked ourselves in a carbon economy, we didn't explore better, maybe more efficient cars. We didn't explore renewables early on.
yeah,
And I think that's what social media likes to do, or big tech in general, is highlight the good stories, because it's true. Social movements have been able to rise thanks to, filming the atrocities of the police and posting them. That's true.
yeah,
But what are the other options?
yeah,
Would we have better options? Would we be, maybe we are. And if we don't ask the question, then maybe in 50 years someone else is going to be saying at what cost, and that's not something I would want to see happen. So I think it's a good comparison, because um
yeah,
we're being given one option and being told, aren't you happy with it? But that's not actually how it should work. We should actually have several good options to choose from, not just one bad and then one other bad one. It just doesn't make sense to me.
yeah. And it's kind of funny to, the way young people today are telling their elders, well, you could have seen this coming, you should have done something. That
Right.
today it's a bit the same, where young
Right.
people um, are really sort of soaking in it, and maybe it's not easy for them to and the adults in the room are not realizing what's going
Yeah.
on. uh,
Exactly.
so for the young people to actually be able to step back and have this critical look at what is happening to their generation would be a huge effort. Uh,
Mm.
so
Right. Right.
their children later will say, "Well, didn't you see this coming?"
Of course, of course, that's a fear of mine, is that that's what's going to happen. And so, like, what were you doing back in 2020 when you could have? And maybe that's a good way to see why, when we fight for climate change, we don't just talk about carbon taxes all the time, and why we say, hey, let's look at the financial markets, and why are they so unregulated? Is because I think when we address those bigger causes, we'll be able to perhaps hopefully address the digital crisis at the same time as the climate one, and not have those kids in 30 years asking us what we were doing.
Yeah. And actually, finally, I think there's a link between the digital crisis and the climate crisis because with this hyper consumption of digital media
For
that
sure.
these advertising based models are pushing, so they're pushing um, excessive screen time in order
Mm-hmm.
to sell advertising, right? In the case of
Right.
social media, the more eyeballs consume social
Right.
media, the more these companies sell ads. And so that's highly unsustainable from a server space point of view, right? Even though these
Yeah.
companies are saying we're going to be carbon neutral, the model itself is a consumerism based model.
Mm,
It's based on
exactly.
consuming as much as possible. It's not based on rethinking how to be more um, frugal in our consumption. And if you probably didn't know this, but before, at the beginning, for example, of video games, you had to purchase a video game. And so
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
we're tempted to to just go ahead and try a video game because it was new to try, and then you have to pay to get to a certain level. So this whole model is just pushing consumption of server space, basically, and
Yeah.
hence, you know, helping to warm the
Energy.
yeah, and
Yeah,
energy. So it's
for sure. I
unsustainable.
think, yeah, we are neglecting the amount of energy and carbon that's being used when we overconsume social media. We're kind of told that it's free. We're always kind of told that, the big cost is the device. And then after that, you're kind of free forever, which obviously doesn't make sense, but we like for it to make sense. And
Yeah.
I also think you're right to talk about the values and the background values that it instills in our minds. It continues this, in my opinion, very North American, and maybe that's because I have a European background, but to me, very North American idea of, if I can, why not take it? If it's there, why shouldn't I consume it? Um, which is, what we do with resources here in Canada, because we have them for cheap. We just consume a bunch of them, and we never work on efficiency. And I think that's the culture that free internet content brings, is this idea that let's just keep grabbing and grabbing, and kind of mindlessly, not really trying to understand what is it bringing to me. Because there's some things that I like watching. I watch Netflix, but I watch them hopefully as mindlessly as mindfully as
Totally.
possible, and not just
Yeah,
mindlessly.
I think that's really the important word here is mindful consumption, both
Yeah,
from a climate point of view and from a mental wellness point of view, because we
for
know
sure.
mindless scrolling is not helping us
No.
from
No.
a health point of view.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Allie. I think that's all with questions.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much